The murder of Charlie Kirk continues to resonate across American society and politics, as Sunday's remarkable turnout for his memorial service in Glendale, Arizona showed. As many as 200,000 people showed up, as did most of the notable leaders of the Trump administration and the MAGA political movement. President Trump, Vice President Vance, Marco Rubio, and many others eulogized the slain leader of Turning Point USA, and the event was a mixture of spiritual revival and political mobilization.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
What impact will Kirk's murder and the response to it have going forward? That's the subject of our conversation today on Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. I'm Paul Gigot, the editor of those pages, and I am here with my colleagues Kim Strassel and Kate Batchelder Odell. Welcome to you both. So one of the striking things, to me at least, about the memorial on Sunday was its religiosity. Kirk's Christianity really was front and center, not only in Erica Kirk's eulogy, but also in comments by political figures, which we don't always hear at events like this. Let's listen to Vice President Vance.
You know, I was telling somebody backstage that I always felt a little uncomfortable talking about my faith in public as much as I loved the Lord and as much as it was an important part of my life. I have talked more about Jesus Christ in the past 2 weeks than I have my entire time in public life.
Kate, what was your reaction to that element of this service?
Well, Charlie Kirk was a Christian, and this is a memorial that was dedicated to his memory. So I think it was expected that would be a theme and a discussion. I also think, we've talked a lot about Charlie's legacy as going onto campuses and debating folks and valuing persuasion. I mean, another core aspect of his life was his personal cultural message to young men. He told young men that they should grow up, that they should get married, work a job, provide for a family, and be pillars of society. And I think that was a decent cultural message from him that is not popular in some corners of the right or left. And we know young men are struggling in many arenas to get college degrees, to get started working. That is a huge issue for the country. Now, that said, there were ways in which this blend of the spiritual and the political was intense, and also really did transcend into setting up a political struggle that is explicitly spiritual, that I might be uncomfortable with, given some of its implications about how you treat your political opponents.
All right, you teased that up, Kate. Elaborate on what your anxiety or what your potential discomfort might be with that.
Well, look, again, the personal message, I think, how should a conservative, a center-right person respond to a horrific event like this? I think the emphasis on personal conduct and on doing what I would call renewing the social order, on being part of your community, on caring for your neighbors, on this is kind of the basic work that I think conservative mind people should be doing in their life. And I think, like I said, the message of helping the country, where mediating institutions that have fallen out of fashion over the last 30 years, that's part of the story of men going online, of becoming radical, is that these other places and spaces for men, the bowling league, civic groups have fallen apart. So again, I want to state that I'm quite enthusiastic about that personal message as a way to respond to this appropriately, to live your life as a pillar of America's social order, because I think that is essential to the American experiment generally. That's pre-American experiment, is to have civic-minded civic institutions. Now, what I think is uncomfortable about this is it calling what's going on in our country spiritual warfare, and organizing and saying that the political space basically exists to be a battle royale with your opponents. I do think that can at times, and it did from certain, from perhaps say Miller's speech talking about they, them, it does sound like a fomenting of resentment in politics, and of setting up politics as an existential struggle, and you're your enemies as unpersuadable and as not just wrong, but evil. And I think that's part of what the left has done in many ways that's made our politics descend into what it is. And so I don't want to see that replicated on the right. That'd be a start of my.
We have a quote from Stephen Miller's remarks, as well as President Trump's and Erica Kirk's that I want to get to. But this point about religiosity among young men, it seems to me that for many young men on the political right, and maybe just young men in general, Kim, is religion has become a bigger part of their lives than I think in the past. They're looking for meaning. They're finding it in a contrast to what has become America's broader secular culture. You see that in the enthusiasm for Jordan Peterson, for example, the Canadian cultural figure. And it's hard to know how widespread this is, but I do see it myself anecdotally in young people I interview, young people I come across, and in my own extended family. Secular isn't as hip as it used to be.
No, and look, in contrast to Kate's deeply thoughtful answer there, I'll just put a more simple one. I think it was really notable, this part of Charlie Kirk's life, his religious fervor and deeply held convictions, is something that for people who knew him, it was something obvious. Even those, I think, if you watched him a lot on TV, you obviously heard it a lot. It's a theme that has sort of grown over the past 2 weeks and been talked about more since his death. And I think it was very powerful. You look at this younger generation, and as you note, many of them feel very alienated from current society, especially when you talk about Gen Z. Religion was probably for them, maybe even in their households, a bit of an abstract idea. They are looking for something. And to see Charlie Kirk so openly and passionately practice his faith, someone that they admired in other realms, I think there's an element to that is simply, well, if he can do it, I can do it. There must be something to this. And that's very strong. I was looking it up because I was curious about this. Pew earlier this year had a new batch of research. They do an annual survey on religion, and they have shown that the decline of Christianity in the U.S. has slowed, and it's kind of leveled off in recent years. Today, about 63% of Americans identify as Christian. And while they don't particularly put this down to young people, there's been a number of other surveys and research coming out to back up what you said, Paul, not just anecdotally, but suggesting that Gen Z and others are showing a real interest in religion. As a side note, just of interest, again, about making things kind of cool rather than secularism, I would note that there were a number of musical performances at the Remembrance, and many of them are primarily contemporary Christian music artists as well, too. And that is something that's also been on the rise.
One danger here, of course, is that this becomes that when you talk so overtly about a particular religion, Christianity, for example, which is the dominant religion in America still, but as a political matter, if it becomes sectarian, it can become alienating rather than unifying. Let's listen, though, to Erica Kirk's remarks, and obviously the most memorable moment, most moving moment from the service.
On the cross, our Savior said, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." That man, that young man, I forgive him.
Very powerful moment, Kate. I think that will stick with people for a long time.
I completely agree and admire her ability to get up and say that. It is also, it offers an example of what we were just talking about, and how Christianity can be galvanizing and helping solve some of our political problems. I mean, there were others who spoke, including the president, who did not exactly bring a message of forgiveness or malice towards none. And that, I think, is a very powerful response that will stick with people a long time. I did want to add one more thing to our discussion about, I think it's fair to say we could really be past peak secular, and that among Gen Z, you do see such a renewed interest in religion that does bifurcate some by gender. Young men are getting more religious, while young women have gotten slightly more secular and less religious, whereas traditionally it has been reversed. In the 70s and 80s, it was more common for young women to be religious than it was young men. And so that is also, I think, an element of this that will influence our politics in ways that haven't been thought about. It specifically is men out there looking for meaning and substance in a way that is new in some sense.
So Erica Kirk was in the background throughout her husband's life, at least in a public sense, Kim. She will have now 2 young children to raise, which is, as both of you know, a full-time job. So it's hard to know how active she can be in her new public role as the head of Turning Point USA. But she certainly now has the opportunity to become a significant political player in her own right, if that's what she wants to do.
And you saw her out there, I think, the way she handled herself up on the stage, and also just the way that she has managed herself in the weeks since this horrific event shows that she's more than capable. I think she could be a real powerful force. And yes, the logistics of that are yet to come. At the same time, I think the good news is that in 10 very short years, Charlie Kirk had turned Turning Point USA into a pretty functioning, widespread organization with a lot of effective leaders at the top of it. And that gives her the space to maybe be, more of a spokesperson if she wants to devote more of her duties. But you never know. They were very much a team. He was clearly poised to do much more in his life. She's likewise extremely young and extremely capable, and now has a national stage all in a couple of moments. And I think that is something worth watching going ahead.
As we signaled earlier, the other element of this memorial event was the overt, among some speakers, attempt at what I would call political mobilization. Donald Trump Jr., for example, was very overt in saying, look, join us. We have a seat for you if you reject the left's values and favor Charlie Kirk's. But there was also some discordant moments in there, and in terms of inviting people, and certainly in terms of a unity message. Let's listen to President Trump.
He did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them. That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry. I am sorry, Erica. But now Erica can talk to me and the whole group, and maybe they can convince me that that's not right, but I can't stand my opponent. Charlie's angry. Look at that. He's angry at me now.
Well, that's the president. The sort of the comic tone, humorous tone of that made it, I think, when you listen to it as opposed to when you read it, make it seem less arch and threatening. He's in some ways mocking his own reputation, which he does have a habit of doing. The press has been playing this up as a kind of overt threat. I don't know, Kate, what's your take?
I agree that it's not maybe the ideal message, and that it was going to be a soundbite and be played all over the place was inevitable. So I would not have recommended it as a speechwriter.
The speechwriter may not have written it.
I'm sure the speechwriter did not write it.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think to your point about the comic, he is obviously trying to have a moment of candor of admitting, he doesn't hold the kind of supernatural power that others like Erica Kirk, who can get up there and express forgiveness to someone in an awful situation like that. I think it's also an attempt to be candid and say, that's not the first thing that comes to my heart, which I think is most people understand as well. So I don't think not a great clip, not a great message for the moment, but also certainly perhaps not what it's not what it's snowballing into.
On the other hand, we have Stephen Miller, and Kate mentioned this earlier, but he's the chief White House domestic policy advisor to President Trump in the second term, and arguably the most important figure after the president and J.D. Vance on domestic policy. Let's listen to his remarks.
We stand for what is good, what is virtuous, what is noble. And to those trying to incite violence against us, those trying to foment hatred against us, what do you have? You have nothing. You are nothing. You are wickedness, you are jealousy, you are envy, you are hatred. You are nothing. You can build nothing. You can produce nothing. You can create nothing. We are the ones who build. We are the ones who create. We are the ones who lift up humanity. You thought you could kill Charlie Kirk? You have made him immortal.
Well, Kim, that is very much Stephen Miller.
Yes, it is.
That's who he is, and that's the kind of governance he is trying to steer this administration towards. And very much said, essentially, in his remarks and his tweets since the assassination of Kirk, that he intends to carry the force of government against their opponents in a significant way. And I think you're seeing some of that play out at the FCC, for example, with what happened with Jimmy Kimmel. And I think elsewhere in some of the talk about going after nonprofits that are on the left, for example, donors to Democrats, and perhaps even members of the media.
There was some real mixed messages going on at this event, or rather, I should say, there was one message that was going on, which was very much undermined by Stephen Miller's speech. I was struck during the president's remarks that he argued at one point that the thing that everyone needed to take on from Charlie Kirk's death, in particular, that there was nothing that Charlie Kirk stood for more than free speech and debate. He listed it as the foundation of this country and everything that flowed from it. And I thought that was a great message for Donald Trump to give, except, of course, as you note, that's not what's exactly been happening among some quarters of the right in the aftermath of Kirk's murder. You have certain quarters of the conservative movement actively working to cancel folks who have been saying things that are certainly gross about Kirk. But, there's been a real campaign to make sure that there is some sort of consequence, as the right would call it, or retribution, you might call it, come down on them for the speech that they make. You have, as you said, the FCC issuing threats to TV stations that might have continued running Jimmy Kimmel in the wake of his comments that he made. That is not supporting free speech. And I think one of the things that Donald Trump came to office promising to do was to get government out of this political arena and have it so that you were no longer living under the threat that if you engaged in politics, you might suffer a government action as a result of it. Not having government engage in political battles or criminalizing political activity. But the kind of comments that you hear from Stephen Miller seem very much designed to suggest that is something that Republicans are now going to embrace and take up themselves. And it's completely opposite of Trump's campaign message. And I think completely opposite of what many of those closest to Kirk really wanted to be the takeaway after his assassination.
Yeah, there's a real potential here coming out of the Kirk killing in a positive sense of mobilizing people for particularly young people to a larger cause. And part of it's spiritual, part of it's civic-minded, part of it's raw politics. Let's represent our values and elect politicians who represent those values. On the other hand, it's self-limiting. If what you're going to do, that movement of the coalition of self-limiting, is what you're going to do is be in constant pitched battle against much of the country. And that's where Miller is. Miller's politics are basically us versus them. They're zero sum. And at some point that's useful. But in this kind of a moment where you're trying to take advantage of all of the kind of motivating sentiment, motivating values that Charlie Kirk represented for young people. It's a discordant message.
Agreed. I'd also add, one speech I would recommend our listeners look at is Marco Rubio's speech, because I thought he did a good job, and he started by mentioning that Charlie was starting to go onto campuses with the message of America is a good country, and for young people to reject Marxism. And Marco said, "Well, could you go somewhere easier than a college campus like communist Cuba?" And so, Marco, I thought, to your point about the limits of, destructive argumentative politics, I thought Marco did a good job, anchoring the Kirk project in a big tent vision that, like I just described, about America. But then he also went into a second point about Americans getting away from other Americans, moving to neighborhoods where people all agree with each other and getting into their own echo chambers. And Rubio, I think, pretty explicitly rejected that and said that was a source of one source of our political problems was people demonizing and alienating other people who disagree with them. And I think so that goes back to some of that civic renewal project I was describing earlier. But we know Marco is a politically ambitious guy. So I thought that speech was quite notable for the more understated, different tack he took than some of the others.
I agree entirely with that. So Rubio and Vance would seem to be the main heirs to the Trump presidency, at least as the president sees it. He's been explicit on that point. But and of course, they're very prominent both in governing this term. I thought their messages were in useful contrast to both the presidents and much of the presidents and certainly Miller's and some of the others, Don Jr., for example, as well. What do you think, Kim?
Yeah, look, what was very clear from this event was this was an event to memorialize Charlie Kirk, to talk about the things that had made him the dynamism that he was. It also very clearly was Republicans setting forth their intention to use what happened here to an electoral purpose going forward. And that wasn't hidden, I don't think, very much throughout this. But there are two ways you can do that. You can do that the way Stephen Miller did it, which is all division, partition, hate. You are nothing, they are nothing. We must go and try to get anger to drive people to the polls. The other way you can do it, and I think this was much more what the Vance and the Rubio message is an aspirational approach, which is to say, if you want to honor Charlie Kirk, then embrace his legacy. Go out there, register to vote, take part in debates, be engaged civically, go to the polls. And, Republicans see a benefit to them if that is what were to happen. But it's much more activism and engagement for a positive purpose rather than division. And those are the two warring impulses you see right now in Donald Trump's administration. And it's interesting because you see the president go back and forth between those as well, too. But as long as there are Stephen Millers in the administration, you're going to see elements of that pop out. And I think that that's worth noting, is that this is not a unified view inside this White House.
To your point about the president going back and forth, you had the two tweets over the weekend, two Truth Social media posts saying, the first saying, Pam Bondi, Attorney General, get with it. Prosecute, I think he mentioned by name, James Comey, Adam Schiff, Letitia James. What are you waiting for? You're hurting our credibility. And then followed it up later with another one saying, Pam Bondi's doing a great job. She's
one
terrific.
One telephone call later.
So I mean, I do not want to be Pam Bondi because if she ever does bring any of these prosecutions, they'll be immediately dismissed as political, almost regardless of what the evidence actually shows. But I guess we told the Democrats when they decided to prosecute Donald Trump that lawfare would redound to their detriment eventually because it would boomerang, and well, here we are. But not good for the country. But anyway, let's return to a happier note here with some of the good sentiment that came out of the memorial service, which I think was actually a pretty significant social and political event. And we will see how it does continue to resonate. I want to thank Kim and Kate for coming on, and everybody in our audience for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch.